Welcome to the Osa Peninsula, home to bustling rainforests and some of the highest rates of biodiversity on the planet. A place with life abounding in every nook and cranny, but also limited resources and fierce competition. Rainforests are a tough environment, but plants find all kinds of interesting features to forge ahead and keep their place. So let's look at a few of those challenges they face and a few of the techniques they use to deal with them. You might not think that in a rainforest, nutrients would be one of the more limited resources, what with all this abundance of life around, but strangely enough, it very much is. One of the results of having a ton of rain here is that the water pretty quickly moves over and through the soil, taking a lot of the nutrients with it. And then add to that the fact that there's just so many plants here competing for the same nutrients, and you wind up with the soil in rainforests usually being quite poor. Obviously, though, you have a ton of plant life here, so they all have ways to deal with this, different techniques and features to help snatch up resources whenever and wherever they can. One technique you sometimes see, you can see in this palm here. This guy, he's not super unusual looking for a palm, depending what sorts of palms you're used to seeing, I guess, apart from being quite short, never really gets much taller than this. But a lot of other palms, you'll see a lot more like slits and gaps in the leaves. And these ones, they're overall pretty solidly shaped. And that, along with their kind of upward angle in the middle here, makes for kind of a basket for catching falling debris and leaves coming from above. Now, that may look like an inconvenience to the plant, but from a nutrition point of view, this is actually quite helpful. There's all these dead leaves falling everywhere on the forest floor all the time, releasing their nutrients just helter-skelter. So why let them do that when you could trap some of them, have them decompose right there, and then wash their nutrients down to your own roots? You can see the leaves here are pretty deeply grooved too in the direction of the center, so that helps channel the water into the compost. Turns out that feature there is actually quite handy from a human point of view, and these leaves were really popular to use as thatch for roofs, so you can channel the rain away from your house. Also a good thatch just because they're really slow to break down and rot, which kind of makes sense, because if you consider they have an almost constant supply of compost sitting on them and rotting, you'd kind of think that the leaves would have to be pretty resistant to rotting themselves. So, handy for the plant and for the human. Had to switch to my phone because my camera just got all steamed up. That's just part of what you get filming in the rainforest. So, if you've ever stepped into a tropical rainforest, one thing you'll notice is, in spite of the hot tropical sun, it is quite dark in there. The trees are just so large and there's so many plants competing for light above you that not much light actually makes it down to the forest floor. This is part of why in primary rainforest in a more stable, relatively untouched state like a lot of the rainforest here in the Osa Peninsula, why the understory isn't all that thick with vegetation. Sometimes there's only around 2% of the sunlight that's actually reaching the forest floor, so there's a lot less plants that can survive in an environment like that. You see more thick tangles at forest edges, steep slopes, and areas where the canopy has been broken into because you just have a lot more light at ground level in those places. But inside, it's quite dark, and the plants that do survive there usually have something special going on that helps them survive. One really interesting set of plants with this is the caustuses, or spiral gingers as they're called. There's a bunch of different species out there, and they grow in all kinds of different habitats, from pretty brightly lit to deep forest shade. But they all, or at least all that I know of, have this thing in common. The stem grows in this interesting spiral shape, and the leaves follow in that, going along the outside of the spiral. Now, it's a quirky feature and a bit of a head scratcher why they do this exactly. Some have suggested maybe it makes for a bit of a spring structure to help against, getting knocked over in the wind, or if things hit it so it can just kind of spring back to its position. But it could also have to do with light. For one, it could be a way of kind of ducking and weaving around other nearby plants that are trying to get in its way, steal its light. Or it could be an efficiency thing. You'll notice its leaves are laid out really well, not just aesthetically, but being in a spiral like this, you'll notice that the leaves don't really overlap much at all and don't block out each other's light. Even if you look into the second row, you'll notice they're either further out from the first row or kind of placed in between the first row's leaves. So either way, not much overlap, and it turns out to be a pretty efficient way to cast a wide net for light in a pretty dark and dappled environment. So often with these things, there's actually multiple advantages behind a feature, so it could very well be the case that it's more than one of these things. But in any case, these plants are all over the place here, so obviously something is working out well for it. Rainforests are, as the name implies, quite rainy, and spoken as someone from the Canadian prairies, very, very rainy. And well, obviously plants need that water. Sometimes it can be too much, and a lot of plants in this area, flooding is just something they have to be able to deal with. This is a seed from a cedro macho tree in the mahogany family that I initially mistook for a rock when I found it. These things will rot if they sit in water, so to avoid being done with as such, they will sprout as soon as they hit the ground, basically. Or they'll try to anyway. Often they get stolen by agoutis and other animals, but sometimes the agoutis scatter hoard them like a squirrel with acorns. But then, of course, sometimes the agoutis forget to dig them up afterwards, so some of them still sprout in the end. So part of why these seeds are so big is to avoid floods. Being this big, they can pack a lot of nutrients here, so when the seed does start to sprout, it can just shoot up quickly and put its first leaves at a height where the floodwaters probably won't be able to take it out. So it's a pretty cut and dry defense being just a big seed, but hey, it works in a situation like this. Just interesting side note with these, if you cut them open like this rat did for me here, there's an oil inside that repels insects, so that found some traditional use, obviously as an insect repellent, also insect proofing wood and stuff like that, so just a handy little thing. So flood dangers, that makes sense in a rainforest, but interestingly, for a lot of plants in the rainforest, the opposite is actually the bigger danger. Less so on the ground, but once you start to go up into the canopy, water becomes more and more scarce. I mean, the problem isn't so much having access to water as it is collecting and holding onto your water up there. I mean, the water comes, but most of it just kind of keeps on going past. Soil holds water for a while. Tree bark, not usually so much. So as a result, canopies are a pretty tough environment to grow in, and you see a lot of different adaptations to deal with this. For the collection side, you'll notice a lot of trees and lianas here have a lot of moss, lichen, and algae growing on them. And this calabash tree is a bit of an extreme example. Like calabash trees, they're pretty much the ideal host for a lot of these things. They've got really deep, soft bark that can really anchor onto there. It's almost hard to see in this case which leaves belong to the tree and which are just other things growing on it. You can see in a lot of the moss and algae growing here, it's got a really soft, spongy, and feathery texture, and it can soak up a lot of water when the rains come. And as you can imagine, a lot of these other plants here kind of benefit from being in that more water-soaked environment. You'll see a bunch more plants like this in my videos on cloud forests as well. For the storage side of things, many orchids show some pretty classic techniques. Many of them have what we call pseudobulbs, these large, thickened and kind of bulbous areas in the stem. The fact that it's thick and round like this means, well, first it's able to store a lot of water, but also it helps keep surface area down. Especially if a plant is in a very hot environment, the more surface area it has, the more water is able to evaporate out. I mean, imagine for a moment this bulb here was the same volume but kind of stretched out and flattened. It would dry out a lot easier. Think like a heap of wet clothes trying to dry out versus a bunch of wet clothes laid flat on the ground. You see a parallel here to a lot of cactuses, similarly trying to retain water in a very dry environment. It's not too surprising that orchids would guard these pseudobulbs pretty well, because this would be a pretty tempting snack for a thirsty creature, but a lot of them will have a whole slew of defense mechanisms built in, such as really tough skins, irritating chemicals, other sorts of toxins. So they might look delectable, but good chance they're not. So those are a few ways that plants cope with these difficult growing environments in the rainforest. There's plenty more where that came from, plenty more bizarre than these yet, but I go into a few others in my other videos. But that's all I have for this time. Thank you for liking, commenting, and subscribing, and for more weird and wonderful plants from around the world, join me next time on Ambling with Sam.